Evil People, Joseph Stalin. Iosif Bessarianis de Djugashvili was born to Bessarion Djugashvili and Ekaterine Galadze on the 18th of December 1878 in Gori, Georgia. At this point in time, the country of Georgia was under the control of the Russian Empire. His father, Bessarion, was an alcoholic and beat him, while his mother, Ekaterine, was a seamstress. Ekaterine would give birth 3 times, however, Iosif was the only child to live beyond infancy. While in seminary school, which he was later expelled from, Iosif began to secretly look at the work of Karl Marx, one of the infamous brains behind communism. Iosif also became interested in a revolt against the current Russian rulers. Iosif would then begin to get into politics and eventually join the Bolsheviks, a radical left communist group led by the infamous Vladimir Lenin. Within the first dozen years of the 20th century, Iosif would also partake in nefarious acts like robbery, which would fund the Bolsheviks. He would then marry his first wife, Ekaterina, in 1906 and would have a son, Yakov, who would die in Germany in 1943 as a prisoner. Iosif married his second wife, Nadezhda, in the late 1920s and would have 2 children with her, Vasily and Svetlana, the latter of which would defect to the United States famously in 1967. Nadezhda would eventually kill herself in the early 1930s. By 1912, Iosif had taken a much more intimidating name, Stalin, meaning man of steel in Russian. At this point, Lenin, in exile, had Stalin serve on the first Central Committee of the Bolshevik Party. After the Bolsheviks took over power of Russia in 1917 after the Russian Revolution, they founded the Soviet Union in late 1922. Lenin was its first leader, and by the mid-1920s, Stalin had been making a name for himself. When Lenin died in 1924, Stalin became the leader of the Communist Party and soon was the new dictator of the Soviet Union. Just within a few years of becoming the leader, Stalin wanted to change the Soviet Union from a rather poor nation into one that rivaled some of the biggest industrial powers in the world. One way to do this was to have farms and other agricultural areas become state-controlled. This was called collectivization. The millions opposed to collectivization were dealt with harshly, most of the time either being removed from the country or killed. Collectivization also caused mass famine and starvation, which claimed the lives of millions. Stalin's regime would also create the infamous gulags, which were large prisons and forced labor camps. The gulags would claim millions of lives. Now in 1936, the Great Purge was implemented, which saw the elimination of any threat to Stalin. This would range to purges in the Communist Party, members of the army, government officials, and more. Many more would be spied on as well, and this Great Terror, as it is called, would go on until 1938 and would claim another million or so lives. The Soviet Union belonged to Stalin, as almost all parts, if not every part of society, was revolving around him. Any of his opposition was eliminated and Stalin was in total control. It would be coincidental that Adolf Hitler was rising to power in Germany around the same time as Stalin. However, the two would get along, at first that is. The Nazi-Soviet War was already covered in several of my past videos, so instead of rehashing them, I will provide a brief summary. The Nazis and the Soviets signed a non-aggression pact in August 1939, and the following month the two powers would invade Poland and split it between them. Stalin would then annex parts of Romania, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, providing a buffer between Germany and the USSR. The Red Army would also invade Finland in November 1939. Breaking the non-aggression pact, Hitler opted to invade the Soviet Union in June 1941 as part of Operation Barbarossa. Despite early success, the Germans would eventually be stopped and defeated at key battles at Moscow and Stalingrad, among others. The Red Army would eventually push the Germans out of the USSR altogether and would defeat them in Berlin in April and May 1945 after Hitler had killed himself. For more information regarding the Eastern Front of World War II, please watch my previous videos about the invasion of Poland, Operation Barbarossa, the Battle of Stalingrad, the Battle of Berlin, and the downfall of Adolf Hitler. Stalin was part of the Big Three, representing the Soviet Union as one of the 3 major allies of World War II, with the other 2 being Franklin Roosevelt for the United States and Winston Churchill for the United Kingdom. Stalin, now aging, did not let up with his ruthlessness even after World War II. However, with the Cold War now happening, he made an effort to make sure that pro-Western ideas, groups, or people were dealt with harshly. After establishing communist regimes throughout Eastern Europe and other places, Stalin gave the all-clear for Kim Il-sung, the communist leader of North Korea, to invade South Korea, which was and still is allied with the United States in 1950. This would help begin the Korean War. Stalin, now in his early 70s, would die as a result of a stroke on the 5th of March, 1953, age 72. Stalin's body was embalmed after his death and was preserved next to Lenin's body, which is still there today, nearly 100 years later. However, Stalin's body was removed after just 8 years of being there and was buried near the Kremlin walls. This was part of the de-Stalinization process after Stalin's death begun by his successor, Nikita Khrushchev. Throughout his reign of terror, Joseph Stalin was the one responsible for the deaths of some 20 million people, cementing his legacy as one of the most evil and ruthless leaders ever. Thanks for watching.